Welcome. I want to start with a question. Have you ever worked with a leader who was brilliant but deaf to needed feedback? Or a leader who was kind but underperforming? Here's the harder question. Have you ever been that leader? If you have, it almost certainly wasn't on purpose. I suspect you were trying to do the right thing. Deep down, I suspect you were fighting for something that mattered. In either case, I bet the results weren't what you wanted. When you're trying to do what's right, when you're focused on something good, it can be hard to figure out what's not working. This episode is about that confusion. It's about how even our greatest strengths can become our biggest blind spots, and how great leadership doesn't require perfection, but it does require awareness, especially of paradox. I want to take you back to a time in my life when I learned this lesson the hard way. I was 19. I was a missionary for my church working in Northwest Texas, and I was all in, driven, committed. It would be fair to call me a zealot. Missionaries always work in pairs, and at one point, I was a senior companion to someone I really loved working with. He was focused, diligent, and dependable, always on time, always ready to go. He never complained. As far as I could see, everything was optimal. We were doing the work, covering ground, teaching the lessons. But one morning, as we sat down for our daily study, he closed his scriptures and said, "Elder Oates, I have a problem." And that caught me off guard. He never said things like that, and I wasn't sure how to respond. He said, "Whenever we're teaching, you teach your part of the lesson, I teach mine, and then you reteach my part before going on. I feel like you don't trust me, like you don't think I'm good enough, like you don't respect me." I was floored and honestly embarrassed because he was right. I hadn't even realized that's what I was doing. I was so focused on working hard, on getting the job done, that I hadn't even considered the need to work collaboratively and how I was making him feel. I was like a backhoe dragging my bucket on the ground behind me and tearing up the street. I just couldn't see it. I apologized that morning, and because he was brave enough to tell me, I got a chance to try again. That moment stayed with me. I learned something about how a focus can be blinding, and also a bit about collaboration, teamwork, and respect. There was a paradox in play, and I had failed to see it. Here's an interesting thing I've learned about leadership. Strengths come in pairs. They're called paradoxes. They seem like opposites, but they actually belong together. Directional clarity and collaboration. Empathy and accountability. When you lean too hard into one side and neglect the other, you feel the effects. And so do the people around you. Even if you don't mean to, even if your intentions are good, and that's what was happening with me. I was fighting for diligence, but I was neglecting my companion's dignity. And I didn't even see the cost until he was brave enough to point it out. This is more common than we think. We admire strengths like decisiveness, vision, structure, empathy, but we rarely ask what happens when this strength gets overused or disconnected from its opposite strength. Clarity can become rigidity. Compassion can become avoidance. Structure can become control. Innovation can become chaos. And when a leader overcorrects, you don't get lasting good results. you just get the opposite problem. And that's why paradox awareness is so powerful, because it helps us to see what's missing in a leadership moment, not just what's broken. When I'm trying to make sense of problem behavior and bad results in my own life or in someone else's, I've found a question that changes the game for me. The question is, what am I fighting for? So most of us lead with a defensive stress response. When we feel threatened or overwhelmed, we instinctively hunker down. So we start fighting against something, against failure, against being wrong, against looking weak. Or we start avoiding conflict, avoiding discomfort, avoiding risk. But when we pause and we ask, what good thing am I actually fighting for? Everything shifts. We move from fear to purpose, from scarcity to abundance. So resisting feedback might be translated to fighting for dignity or self-worth. Avoiding conflict might be translated to fighting for good relationships. That translation moves you from avoidance to leadership. When you identify the good thing you're fighting for, you don't have to give it up. You just have an opportunity to recognize the opposing good thing that maybe you're neglecting. The thing that you're neglecting is the root of your bad results. Paradox-aware leaders learn that great results come from honoring both sides of a paradox pair. They don't choose one side or the other. They find ways to hold them both in productive tension. So, how do you actually put productive tension into practice? You don't need a complete personality overhaul. That young missionary version of me didn't need to give up drive and energy or stop talking at all. I just needed to try something different, something that honored the relationship building and respect I'd been neglecting. So let me introduce you to something valuable, what I call a SAFE, S-A-F-E, a small, affordable, fast experiment. So let's say you've been leaning hard into structure and neglecting flexibility. Your SAFE might be a 10-minute open forum in your next meeting. Or maybe you focused hard on being the fun boss and you've been avoiding accountability. Your SAFE might be one honest conversation that starts with, because I care about you, I need to be clear about what's expected. If you find you've been dominating discussion to make sure everybody's clear on direction, maybe your SAFE is to ask a colleague, what's your take? And then shut up and listen. These are simple experiments that might not be a silver bullet, but used consistently and with attention to results, they start to bring the paradox back into balance. And they start to create the results that you want. They're small, they're low risk, but cumulatively, they're transformative. So, I'll offer something you might try this week. Find a moment where something feels off. Maybe a conversation, maybe a meeting, maybe a moment you wish you could redo, and then ask, what was I fighting for? In other words, what strength might I have overused, and what opposite virtue might I be neglecting? What's one SAFE I can try this week that honors the neglected strength? You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest and willing to lead with more awareness. In the next episode, I'll explore why paradox-aware leadership only works when your goals are clear. Because before you can talk about problems or barriers, you need to know what you're trying to achieve. We'll talk about how to set aligned goals that create clarity, trust, and traction. Until then, thanks for listening to The Leadership Edge. If this episode sparked something for you, visit the LPC to learn more about paradox-aware leadership. Until next time, be curious, be courageous, and lead on.